commentating this tournament. Taking quick draws. I mean, come on, this is ridiculous. It's a good photo. I remember these camps that Gary Kasparov would host for talented, quote unquote talented young players that I had the privilege of attending. That was come on, this is too much.
I love it. People saying Danya coaching Gary.
Right.
Oh man.
No, I had that face of, man, 10 years from now I'll be commentating. 15 years from now I'll be commentating with Robert Hess.
And you're like, wow, my life is gonna be terrible.
I know, that's exactly what I was thinking. Gary saved me from this man.
Oh, well, look at this position, Dinah. There's a queen on c7, a rook on c1. Usually the rook wins the stare down with a queen and an open line. I'm looking at knight d5 type ideas, where if you take, I take, and there's a pin on the knight on c6. So bishop g5, step one. Let's challenge this knight on f6. And if you are Sarana, how are you dealing with that immediate threat?
Well, the question is, do you deal with it by reacting? Because bishop takes f6, gf, yeah, knight d5. I mean, he goes a6, so he forces it from the other side. Now Nihal has a decision. Bishop f6, Robert, even here is possible. Because if you take the other bishop, then of course white has queen g4. Nasty little move.
Oops.
In fact, winning on the spot. g5, queen h6, lobster pincer mate. And there's no stopping it. Yeah, well, bishop f6, gf. Now, what I was mentioning is that once black's king shifts to h8 and his rook comes to g8, I know the pawn structure looks really bad, but these positions can turn really, really quickly.
I agree. But Daniel, one thing I'm looking at is he went bishop d3, but was there an opportunity with like a tactical sequence with knight d5 ideas anyway? So if you took on c6, took on f6, was there a knight d5 here? Because pawn takes, pawn takes. I have queen g4 check at the end.
Bishop on d7, I take on c6 with the pawn.
Oh, you take on c6 with the pawn. But then your pawn structure looks terrible here, right? Like a6 is hanging.
Yeah, but am I not up a piece there?
What are you talking about?
I thought, okay, we were talking about different things. So now I'm looking at your screen. Yeah. I thought you were still talking about knight d5.
No, I was just taking on c6.
I got you. Yeah. I was thinking of a completely different line.
Got it. So bishop c6, bishop
totally
takes c6.
Now, that makes perfect sense, of course. Yeah. No, that's actually looked like a really interesting idea.
Yeah, now that we're on the same wavelength.
If Robert Hess hadn't proposed it, I would have advocated for it wholeheartedly.
Yeah, I was just trying to point out that there is a pin on the bishop on c6 and queen g4 check will hit the other bishop. So it looks like you're regaining your sacrifice material and with interest because there's these weak pawns on the f file. So we didn't see any of that. He retreated his bishop to d3, which is still probably a good thing. Nihal taking the kind of the non-tactical approach.
Which is fine because he wants to play f4, e5, and if Sarana ever plays e5 himself, there isn't this equivalency between the d4 and d5 scores. White has easier access to it than black because black's, the bishop's counterpart is on d7 and not on e6.
Right. That's a very good point. That it's annoying for black because especially after f4, you want to play e5 to stop that pawn from e4 from pushing itself, but that gives up, it vacates the defense of the d5 square. And look at white's pieces, the third rank attack.
Yep.
These knights and bishops all are just doing very well here.
You could slide the bishop to b1 prophylactically, just getting it out of the danger zone. That's not truly necessary yet. You could also, e5, he goes for the direct approach. He opens up the bishop. There are already some sacrifices I'd be thinking about once the rook gets to f3 on h7.
Right, so you can swing your rook to h7 check, with the queen to h5, and you can also start with bishop e4 here. Keep that bishop does so, safe and sound.
Queen h5, be careful, don't do that because of f5.
Good point. So it'll show queen f5 hits the queen, hits the bishop, no en passant for you.
Exactly. Now, is there a knight d4 for you? Probably not because of knight takes d4 and queen takes c1.
Yes, that would.
So that rook on b5, that's an interesting idea by Sarana, right? He's trying to change the course of the game. He's trying to get Nihal to think. And I would still consider going rook f3 here, just continuing with my kingside strategy. He goes king h1, stepping away for the time being.
He wants to go knight d4. Your idea spoke volumes to him because now knight d4, even though your queen on e2 is under attack, it's not under attack with check. So knight d4 takes rook c7. Knight e2 before would have checked your king on g1. Now you take the queen, I take the rook, and thank you for at least an extra exchange and probably more coming after.
Indeed, and knight d4, rook c5, there's knight takes e6. So, I mean, where does black even go? Rook b4, rook a5, but that is not a move you play, if you're in love with your position.
No, certainly not. So knight d4 just challenges black immediately to come up with a couple moves that save the day. But the first move is probably the easier one, like rook a5, for example. It's after that. Like, how do you continue to fend off what is mounting pressure? I would
You
think
could
about
play
f5 too.
a3. You could sort of, yeah, he plays slowly. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's very hard for black to even make a move here. I agree. I would start thinking about sacrifices along the lines of f5.
Right.
But also that rook on a5 could get trapped.
True. And f5, we're just trying to break open the position, but we do acknowledge the e5 pawn is hanging. We're talking kind of just as ideas. Even if the ideas don't work in the immediate position, it's good to have them, store them, figure out later. Yep.
Yeah, no, I think queen d1, but then rook can come back to a5, and I cannot quite find the crushing sequence.
Can you just take on c6, Danya, and just like get a better pawn structure?
You absolutely can, and perhaps you should.
Like knight c6, bishop c6, takes, pawn takes. And you're like, hey, your pawn is here, so you have a weak queen side.
But something tells me that's not the most that I can squeeze out of the position. What Nihal has to be very careful about is not to take too much time. Here goes queen c2. Okay, now rook a5, what is his idea? Is rook a5 even forced? I think it is. And then you go... can't quite see it.
I want to go to knight b3, but then your rook goes to like b5.
Somehow Sarana holds this together. You could go queen b3, and again, you can take on c6 as you proposed at the right moment. Queen b3 will threaten bishop b6 after that, by the way.
True. So, rook a5, queen b3, trying to get the bishop to the b6 square. And there's 96 sacrifices that at some point you can see queen f2.
Does, and again, he's got the threat of knight c6 or even potentially e6 and bishop b6.
All right. So
using
how do you stop
that square on b6.
How do you see rook a4 is one idea?
Yeah.
You might have to play rook a4.
But bishop c2, rook c4. Okay. Wow.
So barely escaping.
Barely, but he does it. And you could double on the c file if you're Nihal. You could add some spice with rook c3, potentially.
But then the queen drops away from the c file. You start feeling...
But you double on the c file, I don't know. Yeah, one gets the sense that's not the most that white can do.
Right.
But you want to be practical in regards to your clock also.
Yeah, I'm like really trying to find that knockout. Bishop f3. So he can move his knight without dropping his bishop on e4. And the only place he could have moved the knight was to c6, which would have been fine. But now he can move his knight elsewhere and continue to go after this rook on a4.
Right, but I like to move queen b8, finally solving the problem of the pin. The knight on c6 can now move. It might be time for Nihal to say, all right, I'm going to take on c6. I'm going to relinquish the rook from my clutches. But no, he goes knight b3. Now, there is a positional component to this idea. If he goes knight c5, he may potentially force the trade, and those dark squares around black's king. Ugh.
Yeah, not good.
Bishop a7.
Bishop a7 was the first one that came to my mind.
Yeah.
But you just go queen a8, and it's not that big.
Yeah, exactly. Knight c5 maybe should be preferred.
Knight
I
c5.
don't know about what Nihal's doing. I mean, maybe it'll backfire, but I guess we'll see in the next couple of moves.
Yeah, this is... Well, the f4 pawn is also a little tender, actually. So if you play knight c5, maybe it'll just take you on c5 and win your f4 pawn. So the rook on that was on b5 and a5 and a4, it's doing a good job. So I would play knight d2, perhaps, because this configuration with rook a4, knight to a5, it's sort of offside, looks kind of questionable. So keeping the pieces on the board, he plays knight d2.
He does it, but after taking on c8.
Why would he?
Yeah,
what's
I'm
the
not
benefit?
sure. I honestly, I'm trying to figure out the same thing because he gives black the c file. Queen c2, bishop d1. I mean,
that's what he wanted to play bishop d1, and with his rook on c1, he couldn't do that.
Oh, that makes sense because it would have been hanging.
Yeah, so he can play bishop d1. The rook goes to a5, knight to c4, for example. Looks really odd.
Knight e4 also.
Wait, that wins the exchange. Yeah, rook a5, knight
Oh
c4.
my goodness! Wait, but rook b5, bishop
then
a4.
Bishop a4, and then rook d5. There's knight b6. So here
amazing. He got to the rook at last.
It took a while, but he got it.
It did, but he got to it eventually. And that b6 square, it's killed black. First, the bishop threatened to appear there. Now the knight threatens to appear there. And Sarana loses the exchange. He's got to give it up in the most strategic way. Maybe drop his knight back to d8, for example, try to take on b5 with the bishop. But at that point, there's knight b6 with tempo. If Nihal even wants to unpin his knight, which he doesn't have to, he can play b3.
Exactly. Or rook c1 and b3, some kind of
Yeah, exactly.
combination of those
Yeah,
moves.
this is losing.
Whoa.
Okay, whoa.
What's happening? If bishop
What if
b5,
you take it
bishop,
and bishop knight b6?
knight b6 looks good.
I mean, queen c2.
No, queen c2, I just take on d4.
Yeah, no, there's nothing. I'm just trying to figure out. I mean, queen d8, you have to give up the piece, I think, and go after. Okay, queen c6. Rook c1 even there was possible.
I think this was smart by Sarana, all things considered.
Knight d3.
His position was losing, right? It's been lost, but this way, at least, in 7 seconds for white, you need to figure things out. So bishop takes b4.
Bishop g1 is a great move, actually.
Yes.
Making everything safe. Now knight c8, knight d6 is a maneuver that comes to mind. You've got to do something with your knight. You've also got to do something. He's got 3 seconds.
Oh, a nice move, pinning the knight. Just you creating little problems.
Trying his best.
Okay, queen c6. He could have been a3 at some point.
b5, knight d6. Okay, he's got to push his pawns, but he's got to watch his king also to Sarana. That's easier said than done. He's got no pieces to do it with.
And this should just be absolutely crushing.
Yeah. Queen b7.
Queen b7.
He's got to move. Oh,
yeah. He barely got that move off.
6 seconds.
He's got. Oh my gosh, he really has
my
to
lands.
Play king f8.
He's got a pre-move. There we go.
Just play any move.
Yeah. And so does Sarana. Bishop d4. That's
queen f7.
Queen
queen e6.
And you can trade queens, go g4, f5.
Yes, he can.
But, yeah, f5 wins. And takes f6, b4, f7. He promotes in time. Yep. What a game. Wow.
He almost lost on time there. He made a move with 0.6
seconds. Yeah, I mean, when you see that clock dipping below a second, that's where I start just getting really nervous.
And that worried me for sure. But if you're a Nihal Sarana fan, you're like, well, I mean, he is another day at the office. Yeah, just
he knows what he's doing.
Casual bullet scramble.